Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Premier ministre, Messieurs les ministres, Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres, mes chers collègues, l'Europe est à un tournant critique de son histoire. Le bouclier américain se dérobe, l'Ukraine risque d'être abandonnée, la Russie renforcée. Washington est devenu la cour de Néron, un empereur incendiaire, des courtisans soumis et un bouffon sous kétamine chargé de l'épuration de la fonction publique. C'est un drame pour le monde libre, mais c'est d'abord un drame pour les États-Unis. Le message de Trump est que rien ne sert d'être son allié puisqu'il ne vous défendra pas, qu'il vous imposera plus de droits de douane qu'à ses ennemis et vous menacera de s'emparer de vos territoires.
What is it? Hold on. Have we Trump, tariffs, EU? I feel like I haven't heard anybody talk about this, or I hear it brought up like offhandedly. Do we know what the tariff? Okay, 25% tariffs. Like symbolically, what does it mean that the United States is going to be imposing higher tariffs on all of our friends than on what is supposed to be our worst enemy? China, right? 20% tariffs or 10% on some things. 20% tariffs, 10% on some things. Why 25% for Canada, Mexico, and the European Union? Why do we have higher tariffs on our friends than we do on what's supposed to be our existential enemy? Like, what the fuck? I feel like that's intentional. The fact that the points are higher for our friends or enemies, I feel like that's an intentional thing. It doesn't make sense. Why not just 25 on everybody?
Tout en soutenant les dictatures qui vous envahissent. Le roi du deal est en train de montrer.
One thing that I wish would come up, maybe he'll say it here, maybe other European leaders have brought it up, is that like, and this is like brainwashing that's come from MAGA and it's brainwashing that's come from young Americans is, and young Europeans on the internet as well, people have this view that like everybody around the world viscerally hates America. But I don't think that's true. Polling data shows that that's not true. But I think that even the vast majority of the hate, at least in Europe for America, is because America is cringe. That's why people like hated America. People would be like, oh, America, that dude is really fucking cringe. But like, if you need to change your tire, or if there's like a big bully coming over to beat you up, yeah, we can call America over. He's probably just going to be really cringe after we deal with our big problem, right? He either is, going to talk about some cringe shit, or he's going to do something that looks cringe. But like, I mean, he's an okay guy. He's just like kind of cringe. I feel like that was America's reputation. I wish that more Europeans would like appeal to the America that was involved in World War I and II, or for the America that, won the Cold War. I wish that there would be more of an appeal from American leaders, from European leaders to that part of America. Trudeau kind of does it when he says, we know that not all Americans are bad, but God, we need more positive narratives or positive stories about the United States, I think.
Le deal est en train de montrer ce qu'est l'art du deal à plat ventre. Il pense qu'il va intimider la Chine en se couchant devant Poutine, mais Xi Jinping, devant un tel naufrage, est sans doute en train d'accélérer les préparatifs de l'invasion de Taïwan. Jamais dans l'histoire, un président des États-Unis n'a capitulé devant l'ennemi. Jamais aucun n'a soutenu un agresseur contre un allié. Jamais aucun n'a piétiné la Constitution américaine, pris autant de décrets illégaux, révoqué les juges qui pourraient l'en empêcher, limogé d'un coup l'état-major militaire, affaibli tous les contre-pouvoirs et pris le contrôle des réseaux sociaux.
This is not a mere illiberal drift. It is the beginning of a seizure of democracy, talking about America. Let us remember that it only took just 1 month, 3 weeks, and 2 days to bring down the Weimar Republic and its constitution. I have faith in the resilience of American democracy, and the country is already protesting. But in just 1 month, Trump has done more damage to America than in 4 years of his previous. We were at war with a dictator. We are now fighting against a dictator supported by a traitor. 8 days ago, at the very moment when Trump was patting Macron on the back at the White House, the United States voted at the UN alongside Russia and North Korea against the Europeans who were demanding the withdrawal of Russian troops. 2 days later, in the Oval Office, the draft dodger was giving moral and strategic lessons to the war hero Zelensky before dismissing him like a stable boy, ordering him to submit or resign. Last night, he took another step into disgrace by halting the delivery of promised weapons. What should we do in the face of this betrayal? The answer is simple. Stand firm. And above all, do not be mistaken. Ukraine's defeat would be Europe's defeat. The Baltic countries, Georgia, and Moldova are already on the list. Putin's goal is to return to Yalta. What is that? Is that a word for older Russian Empire stuff or something? The Yalta conference took place in a Russian resort town. Is this when the Soviet Union was made or something? Or what? Soviet Union would enter the war against Japan and all three would exchange potential. The Soviets would grant a sphere of influence and the Yalta conference. Okay. Oh, a region within Crimea. Okay. It's a conference at the end of World War II to divide Europe after Germany was defeated. Okay, so maybe like the blowing up of the, or the, I guess the inciting moment when the Soviet Union started to grow a bunch. Okay. Putin's goal is to return to Yalta, where half the continent was ceded to Stalin. The global south is awaiting the outcome of this conflict of the decade. Damn, this guy speaks kind of fast. Go French, people. Holy shit. The global south is awaiting the outcome of this conflict to decide whether they should continue respecting Europe or whether they are now free to trample it. What Putin wants is the end of the order established by the United States and its allies 80 years ago, whose first principle was the prohibition of acquiring territory by force. This principle is at the very foundation of the United Nations, where today the Americans voted in favor of the aggressor and against the victim, because Trump's vision aligns with Putin's. A return to spheres of influence where big powers dictate the fate of smaller nations. I take Greenland, Panama, and Canada. You take Ukraine, the Baltics, and Eastern Europe. He takes Taiwan and the South China Sea. In Mar-a-Lago, Gulf oligarchs' parties, this is called diplomatic realism. We are therefore alone. But the claim that resisting Putin is impossible is false. Contrary to Kremlin propaganda, Russia is struggling. In 3 years, the so-called second-best army in the world has managed to gain only crumbs from a country with a population 3 times smaller. With interest rates of 25%, the collapse of foreign currency and gold reserves, and a demographic crisis, Russia is on the brink. The American lifeline to Putin is the greatest strategic mistake ever made during a war. The shock is severe, but it has a virtue. Europeans are emerging from denial. In a single day in Munich, they understood that Ukraine's survival and Europe's future are in their hands, referring to the Vance speech that was just an unbelievably catastrophic, unreal, horrible speech, and that they have 3 imperatives. First, accelerate military aid to Ukraine to compensate for the American abandonment, to ensure it holds, and of course, to secure it and Europe's place at the negotiating table. This will be costly. It will require ending the taboo on using frozen Russian assets. Oof. It will require bypassing Moscow's accomplices within Europe itself. I don't know who a French senator speaks. I don't know how powerful this senator is, or if he... Wait! A little bit? Yalta. We need to defend Ukraine. I think I get this. Come on. I actually think this one's pretty close. For real, though. For realsies. I think it's pretty close. Apparently Europe has, is it like $300 billion in Russian funds that are frozen, but they're not using them because obviously Russia wants that money back. The real implications, the crazy thing is that if, the thing is that like this would be the dissolution of probably the United Nations, I think, right? Because now the European Union would basically be moving against two members who are two of, is it 5 permanent members on the UN Security Council, who obviously would be opposed to this. I don't know if the UN Security Council would even have any say over the utilization of these funds, but the 5 permanent members are China, France, Russia, the UK, and the United States. Yeah, Russia having those funds basically used now, stolen and used, expropriated for Ukraine would be wild, but it should absolutely happen. Well, I say that, but I don't know all the political ramifications of that. I feel like it should happen, though. On the little I know, but... It will require bypassing Moscow's accomplices within Europe itself, through a coalition of willing countries, with the United Kingdom, of course, included. Second, demand that any agreement includes the return of kidnapped children, prisoners, and absolute security guarantees. After Budapest, Georgia, and Minsk, we know what Putin's agreements are worth. Why, dude, where are our leaders? Why do you guys, like, why does, like, he's giving a speech narrativizing the role of the countries in the world. He's making so many historical references to how we all used to act. He's referring specifically to things that need to be done to ensure European and Ukrainian security, giving, like, this is what we need to do. He's referencing actual agreements and countries that the Budapest Memorandum was 94. The 2 Minsk agreements over the invasion were both violated, obviously. People argue on both sides, but I mean, Russia's the invader. The Budapest Memorandum was that nuclear weapons thing, the 94, and then Georgia was a country that was invaded and cut up, just like they're doing to Ukraine. Like, why don't we have American leaders that do this? Why don't we have anybody in America that knows anything? Our leaders, our political leaders, they should know this. We know what Putin's agreements are worth. These guarantees must be backed by sufficient military force. Also, this right here, this is what America should be saying. This is America's role that these guys are fulfilling right now. This is what America should be doing, because we have all the necessary tools and history to do this. To prevent another invasion. Finally, and most urgently, because it will take the longest, we must rebuild the neglected European defense, which has relied on the American umbrella since 1945 and sabotaged since the fall of the Berlin Wall. It is a Herculean task, but it is on its success or failure that the leaders of today's democratic Europe will be judged in the history books. Friedrich Merz has just declared that Europe needs its own military alliance. This is an admission that France has been right for decades in advocating for strategic autonomy. Now it must be built. Massive investment will be needed. Reinforcing the European Defense Fund outside the Maastricht debt criteria, harmonizing weapons and ammunition systems, accelerating Ukraine's EU membership, since it now has the largest army in Europe, rethinking the role and conditions of nuclear deterrence based on French and British capabilities, which I believe are the only 2 EU nations, European nations, I have to say, my bad, that I believe possess nuclear weapons. I think it's just France and Britain. And relaunching missile and defense and satellite programs. The plan announced yesterday by Ursula von der Leyen is an excellent starting point, and much more will be needed. Europe will only become a military power again by becoming an industrial power once more. In short, we must implement the Draghi report for real. I don't know if that is referencing something for European army, but Europe's true rearmament is in its moral rearmament. Destiny. The UK nukes are relying on the US, though, since they use Trident. French nukes are entirely homemade in its systems. That's why he's talking about harmonization. So I'm a little bit out of my comfort zone here, warning, but this is my understanding, okay? One thing that we kind of like take for granted when it comes to working with military stuff is I think there's like an ecosystem, and ecosystems matter, right? Imagine if you go to plug into a person's computer and they're like, oh shit, you have a USB keyboard, I need a PS2 port. Or, oh shit, you're trying to connect your printer with, with whatever cable, I only do a serial port. Like, oh fuck, you need adapters, shit's not guaranteed to work. It's fucked. You have to be working with like similar standards, with similar measurements, with similar tolerances, capabilities, right? The nice thing about NATO and the United States leading that is that the US, when he said harmonization, like there's like the same diameter ammunitions, there's the same diameter munitions, there's like munitions, ammunitions, there's like similar procedures, similar repair things, similar parts, like everything is harmonized. That's what that harmonization means. But unfortunately, a lot of these are probably US dictated standards. Europe would have to move to their own standards to try to create some harmonized thing that would allow these countries to all cooperate with each other in a military manner that would be effective and it wouldn't be a massive clusterfuck headache or whatever, But Europe's true rearmament is its moral rearmament. We must convince public opinion in the face of war, fatigue, and fear, and especially against Putin's collaborators, both the far right and the far left. They once again stood in the National Assembly yesterday, Prime Minister before you, arguing against European unity and European defense. They claim to want peace. What neither they nor Trump say is that their peace is capitulation, the peace of defeat, the replacement of de Gaulle's Zelensky with Ukrainian Putin at Putin's beck and call. Ukrainian Putin? I'm going to take a guess. Is that, oh no. Who's the leader of Belarus? What is that a reference to? Putin was the big guy who surrendered to the Nazis. Oh, gotcha. Okay. Former president of the Council of Ministers of France. Head of the collaborative regime of Vichy, France. The leader of occupied France in World War II. Gotcha. Okay. At Putin's beck and call. The peace of collaborators who, for 3 years, have refused to support the Ukrainians in any way. Is this the end of the Atlantic Alliance? The risk is great, but in recent days, the public humiliation of Zelensky and the series of reckless decisions taken over the past month have finally stirred Americans into action. Poll numbers are plummeting. Republican representatives are being met with hostile crowds in their districts. Even Fox News is becoming critical. The Trumpists are no longer in their prime. They control the executive branch, Congress, the Supreme Court, and social networks. But in American history, the defenders of freedom have always prevailed. They are beginning to rise again. The fate of Ukraine is decided in the trenches, but it also depends on those in the United States who fight for democracy. And here, on our ability to unite Europeans, to find the means for our collective defense, and to restore Europe as the great power it once was, and hesitates to become again. I'll let him have it. Our parents defeated fascism and communism at the cost of great sacrifice. The task of our generation is to defeat the totalitarianisms of the 21st century. Long live free Ukraine, long live democratic Europe. Jeez. Why can't we get parts of this broadcast in some American media channels?